I am 99 years old this June, and I've buried every single person I went to high school with, including my dear husband, Arthur. You see all these folks my age sitting still as stones in nursing homes, and they think they're being careful, but I'm telling you, that chair is a coffin with cushions. My name is Martha Halloway, and I've watched many good heart just stop beating because it forgot how to work. Most people think that after 60, you're supposed to slow down to protect your ticker, but that's the very thing that's quietly destroying you while you watch the evening news. You might think you're resting, but you're actually letting the weeds take over the garden. My grandmother, Sarah Jane, lived to be 102 back when we didn't even have a paved road to the house. She never owned a pair of sneakers, and she certainly didn't have a gym membership. Most folks today are drinking colored water and calling it juice, but they're quietly drowning their heart and starving their brain of the spark it needs to stay lit. You might think a little forgetfulness is just part of the bargain, but I've seen men younger than my own children lose their grip on the world because they forgot how to keep their blood thin and honest. My grandmother, Sarah Jane, used to say that a stagnant pond breeds mosquitoes, but a running stream stays sweet. She didn't believe in the fancy tonics they sold in the catalogs. She believed in the things that grew under the fence line. She drank a specific brew every morning before the dew was off the grass, and she was still doing her own taxes and reciting poetry until the day the good Lord called her home at 102. I've been a faithful student of her kettle for 80 years, and while I'm no doctor, I'm the only one left in my bridal party who can still find her spectacles without asking for help. The first thing grandmother put in that pot was dried hawthorn berries and a bit of dandelion root. I remember being a little girl in the 1930s, helping her gather those red berries after the first frost, and she'd tell me, "Martha, these are the heart's best friend. They keep the rhythm steady when the world gets loud." I made the mistake of ignoring her for a long time, drinking that sweet bottled soda when it first became popular, and I started feeling a strange skipping in my chest like a horse that can't find its gait. The turning point was a hot July afternoon when I nearly fainted just from standing up too fast to greet the mailman. I felt the heat rising in my neck, and my vision went dark at the edges, and I smelled the dry dust of the road. I went straight to the pantry, pulled out the hawthorn I'd neglected, and brewed it dark and bitter just like she did. That berry has a way of opening up the pipes so the blood doesn't have to push so hard, and it keeps the blood from getting clumpy and tired. Science folks say hawthorn helps with circulation and blood pressure, but I just know it makes my heart feel like it's got a fresh coat of oil on the gears. Then, she would always add a slice of fresh ginger and a pinch of rosemary. I remember my Uncle Silas, who lived to 96. He used to say rosemary was for remembering where you put your hat. He'd chew on a sprig while he worked the wood shop, and his mind was as clear as a bell until the end. I used to think it was just a kitchen herb, but when I started adding it to my morning tea, the afternoon clouds in my head started to blow away. It's a crying shame to think of my neighbor Harold, who let his blood get so thick with sugar and salt that he had a stroke right in his driveway. His blood just couldn't get through the tiny little paths in his brain anymore. When you drink those warming herbs, it's like sending a broom through your veins to sweep out the cobwebs. Folk wisdom says rosemary wakes up the spirit, and the science people found it actually helps the blood flow to the head so the brain cells don't wither away like unwatered corn. It truly hurts my soul when I walk past the pharmacy and see people my age buying those expensive memory pills that don't do a lick of good. I think of my sister Rose, who spent a fortune on brain boosters but wouldn't touch a cup of herbal tea if you paid her. She spent her last years staring out a window, not knowing if it was Tuesday or Christmas. That regret stays with me every time I put the kettle on. The habit you must stop this instant is sitting for more than an hour without standing up to move your blood. I remember my cousin Loretta. She was 10 years younger than me, but she loved her recliner more than she loved the sunshine. She'd sit from breakfast to lunch reading those romance novels, thinking she was saving her strength for her old age. I've walked behind a lot of caskets, and too many of them were filled with men who loved the taste of salt more than the gift of breath. My brother Thomas was a big, strong man, but he put salt on his eggs, salt on his tomatoes, and even salt on his watermelon. He'd laugh at me when I'd tell him what grandmother Sarah Jane used to say: "A man who eats the ocean will find his heart drowning in it." She used to season everything with herbs from the dirt, never the white crystals from the store. I followed Thomas's way for a long time because I liked the bite of it, but my ankles started swelling up like overripe melons. I remember sitting on my porch, unable to get my shoes on, and feeling my heart laboring like an old engine trying to climb a muddy hill. The day I stopped shaking that salt cellar was the day I saw Thomas collapse in his garden. He was only 68, and his heart just couldn't pump against all that pressure anymore. I went home and threw my salt shaker right into the trash bin behind the shed. I started using lemon and black pepper, and within 2 weeks the heaviness in my chest lifted like a morning fog. Your body is like a sponge, and when you take in too much salt, it holds onto water until your heart is straining to push against the tide. Doctors talk about sodium and hypertension, but I know it's just about keeping the pressure in your pipes low enough so they don't burst. You have to decide if that extra flavor is worth a shorter life. Loneliness is a quiet killer that eats a hole right through your ribs, and I've seen it take more folks than the flu ever did. After Arthur died, I shut my door and stopped answering the phone, thinking I was just grieving in peace. But my heart started skipping beats, and I felt a coldness in my chest that no blanket could warm up. Grandmother used to say, "A lone coal goes out, but a pile of wood stays hot all night." She lived in a house full of kin, and even when she was tired, she was part of the hum of life. I was making the mistake of thinking my heart only needed medicine, when what it really needed was a reason to keep beating for someone else. The turning point came when my neighbor's little girl, Dot, knocked on my door asking for a button to be sewn on her coat. I saw her shivering, and as I worked the needle, I felt my own chest start to thaw. I realized I had been dying of a broken heart simply because I wasn't using it to love anyone. I started going to the church socials again, even when I felt like staying in bed. It breaks my heart to think of my friend Betty, who moved away to a city where she knew no one and passed away in her sleep just 6 months later from natural causes. I know it was the silence that killed her. When you talk and laugh, your brain sends a signal to your heart that the world is a safe place to stay. They call it the social tie effect on the vagus nerve, but I just know that a lonely heart is a tired heart. We grew up thinking sugar was a treat, but for those of us over 60, it's more like pouring sand into a fine watch. My best friend Martha, we shared the same name. Had a sweet tooth that wouldn't quit, always baking pies and licking the spoon. Grandmother Sarah Jane would only give us honey once a month, saying too much honey turns the blood to syrup and syrup don't flow. I ignored that for years, eating those store-bought cookies while I watched the birds. I started feeling a burning in my chest and a fog in my head that wouldn't clear, even with a strong cup of tea. I remember the day I found Martha slumped over her kitchen table, a half-eaten donut still in her hand. She had survived the war and the Great Depression, but she couldn't survive the sugar. That was the day I stopped buying anything that came in a bright, shiny wrapper. I went back to the berries and the apples the way God made them. I felt the inflammation, that heat in my joints, and the thumping in my ears just fade away. When your blood is full of sugar, it's like trying to pump molasses through a straw. It tears up the inside of your heart's walls. The medical books call it glycation and arterial damage, but I just think of it as keeping my internal house clean of sticky messes. The last habit that's destroying your heart is the one you do inside your own head, the habit of worrying about things you can't change. I spent 40 years worrying about the bills, the kids, and the roof, and all it gave me was a fluttery heart and a gray face. Arthur used to tell me, Martha, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it don't get you nowhere. Grandmother Sarah Jane never worried. She just prayed and worked. I had to learn to let go of the what ifs before they put me in the ground next to the people I was worrying about. I remember missing my grandson's graduation because I was so worked up with anxiety that my heart started racing and I had to go to the hospital. I sat in that white room, listening to the machines beep, and I felt such a deep regret for all the joy I'd traded for fear. That was my turning point. Now, I take a deep breath and I tell my heart, we've seen the sun rise 94 years, and it'll rise again tomorrow without our help. So remember, hawthorn for the pump, ginger for the flow, and rosemary for the mind. Keep your blood thin, keep your heart light, and don't let the sweet life sour your golden years. Stand up often, put down the salt, find a friend, leave the sugar, and let go of the worry. Life is a short walk across a beautiful field, and you don't want to spend it looking at your feet. You have the power to change how your story ends, starting this very minute. I think I'll go sit in the garden now and watch the bluebirds for a while. They don't worry about tomorrow, and neither do I. Thank you for staying until the end. If this is something you have learned from and would be trying, please like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful posts every day. Your support means everything.